May series, 7 sessions in May. From the June session onwards, we're going to have once a week series of webinars. It's an honor to be able to say that the topics for these webinars have been chosen by teachers like you. All the topics that are chosen for the June and July session is based on the needs analysis and the requests that has come from teachers in Nepal. So hopefully the sessions are going to be very useful. I'm Vaishali Pradhan. I work for the British Council, and welcome to my team and to colleagues from NELTA as well. Today, the topic for today's session is developing lesson plans for online teaching. And we've got two great presenters with us today, Dr. Uttam Gowli, all the way from the US, and Ms. Karen Watterson, all the way from the UK. So it's a very multicultural session that we're going to have today, and hopefully a very fruitful one. Karen holds a Delta and an MEd in ELT and technology, and she has been teaching for over 25 years. She has worked as a teacher and teacher trainer in over 8 countries, including the UK. Karen is currently based in Edinburgh, Scotland, and she holds a position of e-learning consultant with the British Council. She has a particular interest in teaching in low resource environments, teaching large classes, as well as using digital tools to enhance the teaching and learning experience for learners and teachers. Dr. Uttam Gowli is a lifetime member of NELTA. Currently, he serves as an associate professor at Morgan State University's Community College Leadership Doctoral Program. He is also the president of Star Scholars Network. He is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Underrepresented and Minority Progress, and the author of 3 books, including Global Adaptations of Community College Infrastructure. After a decade-long systematic study on brain drain, he conceptualized and propounded the idea of brain gain for Nepal's development. I'm very hopeful that today's session is going to be very interactive. Before I hand it over to the presenters, a couple of housekeeping rules. The webinar is being recorded, so you will all receive a recording of the webinar from us in an email tomorrow. You will also receive links to the certificates, which you can download, type your name, and keep it for your reference. The British Council website and the NELTA websites are there on the screen for you as well for more resources. A couple of housekeeping rules. I would request everyone, if you're not the speaker, please could you mute yourselves so that it's clear for everyone. We would also request you to not switch on your videos just for bandwidth issues so that the presentations and slides are clear. If you have any questions, please could you use the chat box. We really wouldn't encourage people to switch on their microphones and take questions. Again, to maintain discipline throughout the webinar, please use the chat box as much as you want. Put down your questions there. We will keep a track of that. And just in case there is anything you really need to say, you can put up the raise hand button so that we can get in touch with you through the chat. Along with the recording of the webinar, you will also receive an evaluation form. Please take out time to fill it up. It's feedback from you that actually helps us make the webinars better and more useful. So we will wait for your feedback as well. I'd now like to hand it over to Dr. Uttam to take the session forward.
Namaste, everyone. Thank you, Vaishali, for this generous introduction. I am thrilled to be back with my people. I started my career as a social studies and English language teachers in Midwestern part of Nepal. And I grew up as an English language teacher, educator through NELTA, and I owe a lot to British Council. While doing my master's degree, I used to visit British Council for books and for other opportunities like these. So I'm really happy to be speaking with you. Hello, Nepali teachers. Namaste again. And I understand that you have been locked at home with stay-at-home orders. And I imagine if I were in Kathmandu, I would really miss going out with my friends and snacking on some momos. But as you can imagine, you're teachers and you can be very creative. So no matter how you teach, you talk about the planning And I really appreciate that you chose this topic, my favorite topic. And by the end of this webinar, there will be a few objectives that we will aim to meet. You will be familiar with the similarities and differences between lesson planning for teaching face-to-face and teaching remotely. Hopefully, you will be familiar with the simple structure of an online lesson, and you will be able to understand how activities are set, designed for online lesson. And also, we hope you'll be able to have a list of useful links. We actually have a lot, thanks to Karen, our co-presenter. So I was going to start my presentation by asking you a question. How often did you touch your students when you were in the classroom before this pandemic? I can't see the responses, but I can imagine many of you miss that touch. But as creative teachers that you are, you always find a way to touch your students' hearts. That's what happens when teachers and students interact. So I thought about these simple fundamental senses because in one of our meetings here at Morgan State University, when this pandemic happened and every teacher was asked to shift their lessons online, one teacher really went berserk and she said, "No, it doesn't make any sense." And I thought about the senses. Fundamentally, we have 5 senses. We talk about 6th sense, 7th sense, sense of direction, and a lot of things, sense of dress also, right? But fundamentally, there are 5 senses. And it is very disorienting that we are no longer in the classrooms together with our students. So what did we lose? I wanted to reflect back. And definitely we lost touch, smell, but we have the sight, right? You can see me, I can see you if you turn the camera on, and sound, we can talk to each other. But we definitely lost the taste. But did we really lose these senses? So what have we gained? Is it, how often did we use the sense of smell? Did we also happen to gain something by not having to deal with all kinds of smells in a hot day in the classroom? And we can still have our students go to their favorite restaurant and taste all kinds of things and report back to us. We haven't lost that. So it turned out, it feels like we gained something extra by going online. We have better classroom management tools like mute all. Like, we didn't have that magic button in the face-to-face classroom, did we? So as a teacher, you already know that the attributes of physical classroom do not guarantee that a class is effective or engaging. The same goes for online platform. Yes, platform has changed, but you are still the same creative teacher. You know your classroom. You know your students. You know what works, what doesn't. So do not forget that you are the same teacher, but you have some extra things at your hand. For example, the connectivity. A lot of students or their parents or their elder brothers or sisters have already been using social media. They already know how to Google things and how to connect with people, how to turn their camera on, how to mute their phone. A lot of things they already know. So as teachers, we try to leverage what we have and go to what we do not. So therefore, we're thinking, which of your classroom teaching strategies translate well to the remote setting, now that it's online setting, and which don't, and what new approaches we might incorporate. So, as I said, it's a mess everywhere around the world, not only in Nepal, even here in the United States. Everybody is panicking because the teachers are really missing their classrooms, and students are missing that kind of physical presence with the teachers. But they are trying to recreate everything. So when you set the classrooms online, what people are doing here in the United States is they are trying to recreate and adopt some of the same rules and norms that they had in the physical classroom, like taking notes, participating by asking questions and answering questions. And also they are encouraging that the students wear classroom ready clothing so that they feel that they are with the teacher and set a particular time to join with the teacher. And some housekeeping rules you already heard, right? You know, starting in the quiet place and turning your microphone off when you are not speaking, or turning your video off when you're not showing anything. And another important thing you will hear from Karen Moore is closing browser tabs that are not required in participating in this class. So we all will make it a success by collaborating and committing and bringing our whole selves into the online classroom. So we are humans. When something really difficult happens, we learn things. That is natural. That's how God designed us. And the difficult time is also an opportunity to innovate. So online environment removes access to certain modes of teaching, but it also opens up a number of new possibilities, some of which you may be able to bring back to your physical classroom once this crisis is over. It will be over sooner or later. So students are likely to be more forgiving of missteps in a new environment. It's a new environment. We are all learning things. So let's not kill ourselves by expecting ourselves to be perfect. It's not going to start with perfection. It's going to start with what we know, what we have, and we will move towards perfection as we have always done. So let's take advantage of this difficult time to experiment with new teaching methods and tools. For that, here are some considerations. Okay, let's ask ourselves, what can we realistically accomplish? It is not necessary that you accomplish everything. So in this new setting, we have to ask ourselves and be realistic. And we can select activities for now and those for later. So it is not necessary at this moment to just follow the sequence of the textbook. There may be some lessons which you can defer for later. And what is the best lesson that you can teach online? You can select, you can be selective. And don't expect to master everything on day one. Even if you think none of the objectives were met on your day one, you did something, that is, you tried a new thing. And when we try new things, what happens? We learn from our mistakes, right? We learn fast. And our students learn even faster. So it is okay to invite our students as co-creators around pedagogy. It is sometimes even okay to learn from our students. So be ready to be the co-creators of pedagogy and have fun. With this, I invite Karen for the real stuff to begin. Hi, Karen.
Hello, everybody. Namaste. It's so wonderful to be with you all. I spent a wonderful couple of weeks in Nepal last year, and like Dr. Uttam said, I really miss eating a lot of those momos. I became very addicted to them. Thanks for the introduction, Dr. Uttam. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the similarities and differences and look at some practical ways we can move our lessons online. So when this whole pandemic began, we sort of launched ourselves into online teaching. I don't know if any of you felt like this. We were in our classrooms, everything felt normal and comfortable, and all of a sudden we went into online panic, what to do. Did any of you feel like that? You can write in the chat any of your emotions when you started teaching online. So for me, it was a little bit of a panic and a steep learning curve of having to learn a lot of new things. Yep, people were confused, a bit stressed. How do we navigate our way from something we already knew how to do? Very chaotic at the beginning. Yes, we all felt like that. And suddenly we had to begin a new journey. Next slide, Dr. Utam. So when you plan lessons, so now we're going to go back to the beginning. When you plan a lesson, what do you think about when you plan lessons? If you can write in the chat, what things go through your head when you're thinking, I'm going to teach tomorrow, how can I begin my planning process? Stages, yes, we need to think about stages of the lesson. We need to think about objectives. That's right, we need to plan. That's very good. Tanka there is writing, Shanti's writing the topics, the objectives. Excellent. So these things are all the same. The activities, the level, how do we deliver it? What materials do we need? So a lot of these things are the same. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here are a lot of the things that we do when we plan. So these are all the same types of things. And I think it's easy to forget that a lot is very similar between an online lesson and a face-to-face lesson. We're all teachers, we know how to teach, we're great at what we do. So these are a lot of the things that we want to think about. However, some of them are different between face-to-face and online lessons. So let's have a look now about some of those differences and what is the same. So we're looking at face-to-face, synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous is live, like we are now. Asynchronous is at a separate time. So there are a lot of similarities here. So we can feel confident that we do actually know what we're talking about, and we know how to plan and prepare a good lesson. So what is different? Well, the use of technology is the biggest difference, as we can see down at the bottom there. We do use some technology in our face-to-face lessons, but in synchronous lessons, we are using a lot of technology, and the students are using technology. This is a very new aspect for many of us. In an asynchronous situation, a lot is the same, but we don't need to do any classroom management. Perhaps we need to take more record keeping, and we don't have any use of the board in an asynchronous session. So I'm going to move on now to have a look at some of the differences. So technology is one of the main differences that we have there. The next, so with technology, yeah, next slide. Thanks, Dr. Utam. So the next point there is using technology. We need to practice the technology. I don't know if many of you have practiced the technology a lot, but for me, before I do anything new, I ask my friends and family. I have very sympathetic friends and family who I practice with if it's a new idea. Once I didn't do that, and it all went slightly wrong. But as Dr. Utam said before, this is now a really amazing time to practice because everyone is very forgiving at the moment. We're all in the same situation together. One point about the technology is when we're using technology to deliver a lesson, it can look very different from the side of the teacher and the side of the learner. So if you can practice what it looks like from the learner view, that will help you with any troubleshooting your students might need. You also need to give them a lot of time to practice. So with the planning and the delivery, the planning takes much longer. I'm sure you've already realized this. The planning takes a lot longer in online planning than it does in face-to-face. And the delivery takes longer as well. So when we're planning, give yourself a lot more time. And when you're delivering, you need to build in a lot of variety and it's very intense when you're delivering an online lesson. So build in some movement breaks, stand up and sit down, or turn around or stretch, because we're sitting and concentrating quite a lot. Another huge difference is in learner autonomy. In our face-to-face classes, it's very much the arena of the teacher. And we have a certain amount of time to have with the students. So we need to enable our learners to be more autonomous, to take more control of their own learning. And this is a huge difference between face-to-face and online. In an online learning environment, synchronous and asynchronous, our students are our helpers. So we need to give them some of the ability to check their answers themselves, decide what they need to learn, when they're going to learn in an asynchronous situation. So it's very important that we allow time and training to develop learner autonomy. It's something that a lot of research has talked about, and we know that learner autonomy is very important. And the final point of a big difference is the board work. In a face-to-face classroom, you can write on the board at any time you want, but I don't know about you, I'm not very good at drawing. So I'm not very good at illustrating things on the blackboard. It all turns out to look a little bit of a mess. In an online classroom situation, we have the fantastic ability to plan all of our board work before the lesson. Now, going back to the second point there on planning and delivery, it takes time. So we can plan our board work with colour and visuals, and we can move things around. And this is an incredible bonus for a lot of learners who are more visual learners and who appreciate colour or movement as well. So I'm now going to pass back to Dr. Uttam, who's going to tell you a little bit more about what's next.
Thank you, Karen. Great debut. Definitely, as Madam Karen said, planning is the great thing. That's where the magic happens, right? So as we talk about lesson planning, it is the same old structure, no matter whether it is a face-to-face physical classroom or an online lesson. It has a beginning, it has the middle activities, and it has the end concluding activities, right? Usually at the beginning, we set a context or do some warm-up activity. At least we try to activate our students' brain to bring them to the topic that we are discussing. And in the middle, we do multiple different activities, and we conclude with something like wrap-up or evaluation. Simply, if we think of a reading lesson, what would go in the middle part? You could put a text on the screen. You can set a timer. Learners will mark where they got up to by the end of the timer, right? And learners can mark unknown words on the screen. And learners use their own dictionary, online dictionary or a paper dictionary if they have, to look up new words and discuss in chat, breakout rooms, or nominated groups. And teachers can set comprehension questions. So simply, these are some of the activities that we do for a reading lesson. I will not dilly-dally on this because this will be available to you later. And for a listening session, for example, you could start with a video with audio off. I really like this lesson plan I stole from Karen. I acknowledge this, but I see that the principle of active learning is embedded there. So when you turn the audio off and just play the video, what happens? The kids become curious, right? And they predict the dialogue. They imagine something. And finally, they listen with audio and ask, what is the same or different? It's a lot of fun. And finally, we can check comprehension with a quiz or poll. So if it is simply Speaking lesson, that could be an activity where learners use fingers or puppets to act out a dialogue with microphones off again, right? To let their brains do the work. That's very, very important. And then you can nominate pairs or small groups to have the conversation in front of the others. So with some of these activities, I think we will take you to a little tour of steps of designing an activity. Back to you, Karen.
Thanks, Dr. Uttam. So we can see from what Dr. Uttam was talking about is the steps of a lesson are the same. There's a lot of similarities. And even though it can feel very scary, like we're jumping off a cliff into the unknown, we can still stick to our same principles of good teaching practice that we all know how to do. So now we might think, well, that's all very well, but what do we do? How do I even begin to think about designing an online lesson or creating some material for an online lesson? Well, in the same way that we might go about it in a face-to-face classroom, we need to start from the beginning and thinking about what are our learning outcomes, as some of you have mentioned in the chat. What are we aiming to achieve? Once we know what we're aiming to achieve, let's say, for example, we might be wanting to teach some language of description. Then we want to break our material into smaller chunks. In an online class, we need much shorter and smaller activities than a big, long exercise. So we need to break it into smaller chunks. We have a wonderful opportunity in online to use a lot of visuals. For example, I'll just bring up a small visual I have here that I often have at hand, a little magic wand. Bing! These are for young learner classes. Oh, sorry, can you go back a little moment? Thanks. So some visuals. We can use PowerPoint. We can use Word documents. We can use pictures. Just be careful with pictures about copyright, though. We don't always have a lot of copyright. So we can also give you some links to some copyright-free resource websites. Now, instructions are very important. In the classroom, we are very used to giving instructions when we need to. But in an online lesson, we have to be even more careful with the instructions because we can't always see necessarily who can understand and who can't. And for me, I know that I've been constantly for the last 25 years been working on improving my instructions. So if we can write out the instructions, it helps learners to read and hear the instructions. And again, that's part of the planning process. And as Dr. Uttam mentioned, we need to be ready before the lesson, create all of our material beforehand, close some of all of our windows, except for the things that we need. And then we can feel more confident to be ready. So these are some of the steps in designing an activity. Now, one of you is mentioning in the chat, any suggestions for practical sessions? Well, luckily, I got sent, Dr. Uttam and I were sent some samples of some of your course books. So let's have a look now about how we might begin with this lesson. So this is an activity from one of your books. I believe it's grade 9, if I'm not mistaken. So where would you begin? Where would you begin to create an online lesson using this material? If you could write some of your comments in the chat, thinking about, you know, some of the steps or the stages that we've talked about before. We've mentioned the steps of a lesson. We've mentioned some of breaking things into chunks. We've mentioned learning objectives. Where would you begin if you were creating this for an online lesson? Any ideas in the chat? Everyone's gone a little bit shy. It can happen sometimes in an online lesson, or possibly because I haven't given enough thinking time. So one of you is suggesting pictures. Well, we have pictures here. What is the topic of this conversation? Yes, talking about the pictures. Well, we mentioned that there are stages of a lesson. So how might we do this as an introduction or a warmer? What steps might we take? We might ask students if they have a microwave in their house. Yes, that's we've got pictures there. Have they seen these things before? Yes, absolutely. So these are some gadgets that we have. So this is now what I'm going to do now is I'll take you through the steps of creating this into an online lesson. Oh, lots of fantastic ideas that are coming up here. This is really great. Yeah, in the warm-up. Very good. Okay, the next slide. So we mentioned that we need to break things down into chunks. So here might be a warmer that we could use to start off with. What can you see around your house? And students can either shout out, or they can type in the text, or they can write it on the screen if you have a shared whiteboard. Or if you wanted to be more specific, you can ask them to name things beginning with a particular letter. And this is a way of getting the students into the topic of gadgets and objects and describing objects, for example. The next one. And then, so we've done a little warmer, which is beginning to help them think about the topic. Now we can go into some of the pictures. So we show the pictures to the students. We might want to do some vocabulary drilling, for example. And one of the beauties of an online environment is we can have videos on and off and sound on and off. And so we could do some choral drilling with the sound off. Remember how noisy it used to be in the classroom? So we can go through the pictures and first of all, identify the pictures. So then we think about, Dr. Otam, can you go back to the previous slide? Sorry. The one before that. Yes. So here we have a huge amount of text. So that's quite difficult to be reading on screen because it's quite small. But I believe that a lot of your students have the book. So they can refer to the book and be looking at the book there. And you can ask them to do the activity in the book rather than necessarily showing small print on screen. If we can go the next one. Yes, this one. Oh, one back. Thank you so much, Dr. Utam. Isn't he wonderful? Wonderful in the background there. So here we have the learners are describing what they see. Now they have the book, so they can spend a little bit of time reading themselves and matching to the object. But how might we check the answers, you might think? Well, one of my favorite tools is a mini whiteboard, which can simply be a piece of paper that they hold up to the screen, or it can be with sellotape or a plastic bag that students write on, and they can each hold up the answer and you can check that way with the descriptions. Then we move on to the next part of the lesson, step 3, where we ask learners to, in their books, find some of the examples of "it is used for" in the text. We can put these on the screen and learners can then make their own. So the first step is for noticing the grammar and noticing the sentence structure. And we can use the chat or, again, a shared whiteboard to be able to do that. Then we also want our students to be able to make their own sentences. So this is quite a big step, and you might not even have enough time to do all of this in the same lesson for students to be making their own sentences. So somebody asked in the chat, how might you represent this on the board? Because we talked about using colour for board work. So here's an example of what I might have chosen to use. It is used for plus, and I ask the students to notice what word do they see coming after for. And they will all notice that it's ing in that kind of a way. So we can also use arrows to show the difference between where the grammar goes, and we can use color to represent verbs, for example. So what I would probably do is have a couple of example sentences and ask students to make sentences on their own in the chat. If I have the ability to put them into breakout rooms, then I would consider having some form of guess, say and guess, so that they're personalizing the sentences. Describe something you can see around you and the other students can guess what it is. So we're always thinking about active learning. How can we engage the students? And the students need to be doing something. So you might say, this is all very well, but I don't teach synchronous lessons. I don't have my students able to participate in an online class. I only send things to them and they send things to me. So how might we structure this if we were in an asynchronous class? That's the next slide, Dr. Utam. So this is what we might do for the very same lesson using your own course book in an asynchronous lesson. So first of all, we can send a message to our students either through a text message or through WhatsApp or through email. It depends whether your students have any of those abilities or not. Or it might even be a phone call. What can you see around you? And the students then write back to tell you what they can see. Then you can ask them to do the matching activity in the course book. And this is where the learner autonomy comes in. They need to be able to check the answers themselves. And you'll say, but they'll cheat. Well, interestingly enough, when you give the power to the students, they don't really, after a while, they don't cheat, because they recognize that it's in their own interests and they have been empowered to check themselves. Or you can ask them to check with a friend, either by SMS or WhatsApp or whatever platform you use. For some of the speaking and oral activities, they can send a recording of the words, either by a voice message, or you can send them or put a recording and they listen and replicate. And again, it's developing a lot of learner autonomy. Then you can ask them to find the structures and use the structures within forums and messages, whichever platform. So that's a kind of comparison following a very similar pattern, just thinking a little bit more creatively about how can I ask the students to be a bit active and take control of some of their own learning. So I hope that has given you some ideas, along with some of the ideas that Dr. Utam mentioned in terms of some ideas for a reading and a speaking lesson. And finally, we come on to a very important aspect around online safety. When we are in the face-to-face classroom, we have a closed room and a closed door. If you have a door. I've worked in many classrooms without any doors or much walls, where we are in charge of our students. But online, it's much more difficult because we are not there with them to be able to be noticing. So we have to make sure that we keep everybody safe. And there are a number of different ways that we can do this. The first one is you really check with your school for what policies that they have. What guidelines is your school offering you to check? Now, parents are also very, very important in this aspect of online safety. And we need to be using the parents quite a lot in this. They are a kind of, assistant teacher in a way. Dr. Utam, would you like to continue with the rest of the online safety ones?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important, Karen, involving parents, because we are not around our students. And that is one of the disadvantages or one of the forms of online teaching, I would say, that students may be subject to cyberbullying. For example, if you don't know what bullying is, let your students know very well that if somebody asks you to do some activity that makes you comfortable, that is the time to stop and call your parents or get out of that room, whatever online room that is. And therefore, only allowing learners on the register into class is another important safety activity that teachers can do as the gatekeepers. So in your classroom, do not allow unidentified person. They may steal some personal information and use the vulnerabilities of the students to abuse. So you are in the learner's home and they are in yours in one way, but in another way, you don't know what other rooms or other activities they may be engaged in, other tabs of their browsers, which we have no control over. Therefore, we need second eyes of the elder siblings or parents or whoever is at home. Very important. Thank you, Karen. What did we miss? And wrapping up, when Karen comes back, I want to say,
Hi.
yeah, great. Let me finish my 2 points or 3, let's say. So, my dear teachers, what I want you to remind at this point is that you are still the teachers. Okay, do not forget that. You know your students, you know what works, and you are creative. Karen.
I couldn't agree more. I think everybody, from what I've heard over the last couple of months, reading comments on forums, talking to teachers and teacher educators, is how amazingly well people have adapted to this emergency remote teaching situation. Huge learning curves, everybody in the same boat together. And it has really, for me, it's really brought a lot of the teaching world together. We're sharing things globally, we're connected globally, we're having a communal struggle which is uniting us in many ways. And there's fantastic things that people are doing in their classrooms, so creative and interesting. And another point that I have also learned from a lot of talking to the teachers is that their students are quite enjoying this new way of learning. Sure, there's some motivation difficulties. Classroom management is quite different. It takes a lot longer to do everything. But generally, overall, I think students are responding well. I'm not sure if any of you have felt like that. But yeah, I would say a big pat on the back to everybody. Well done.
Well done. And don't forget, we have shared lots of useful links, which you enjoy and find. It is from the Treasure of British Council, and many of them are actually created by Karen. And I have learned a lot, and I'm sure you will enjoy and use your creativity to unlock the potentials of your students. We are now open for questions, right?
That's right.
Thank you. And
thank you. Thank you, Dr. Uttam. Thank you, Karen. That was a really informative session. We're now open to questions. I'd request you to please use the chat box to put down your questions and continue being on mute and switching your videos off. We've got a very disciplined set of audience today. We're really glad about that. I would really hope that you continue using the chat box. I have taken down a couple of questions. Maybe we can start off with that. Okay. It'll be open to the both of you. You can take turns to answer them or just do one each. So the first one comes from Pavitra, and Sandesh as well had asked the same question. How do you form groups when using an online platform?
Dr. Uttam, would you like to address, how do you form groups?
Yes, that's a really good question. Some platforms actually allow groups like Zoom, but I think there is also a difference. Some of the platforms allow some limited activities um, for the free account. If you have a paid Zoom account, I think it allows, but I don't know what other platforms you're using. I'm not sure if I were you, if the LMS gives you that facility, use it. If not, I don't know. There we could be creative in creating WhatsApp groups or SMS groups or that kind of activity. And I will definitely rely on some of the ideas from Karen.
No, I think that sums it up very well. Zoom has an ability to have breakout rooms. It also is quite good within low connectivity situations. The free version allows breakout rooms, I believe, but the time limit is short. Other creative ways of using groups is through private chat. That can be pair work, so you can have pairs talking to each other. And as you mention, in asynchronous situations, quite a lot of the platforms allow a form of grouping into classes like Google Classroom or Edmodo, where people can interact on a forum specifically. But in a face-to-face class, it's a little bit more limited. And like Dr. Uttam says, we need to keep our creativity going, which is where things like, finger puppets, for example. Here I've got two hands, so I can, and my head, so I can make a little mini group of 3 in my head. Not quite the same.
Yeah, that reminds me of something like using what exists out there already. I mean, I don't know what the school policy is. If you can use social media, you can group messenger groups.
Yeah.
If that is allowed, but you have to be careful with that.
You do have to be careful. I think more and more, lots and lots of online platforms are realizing that grouping is something a lot of teachers want. And so all the developers, I think, are working very, very hard in the background trying to create the technology to meet the teachers' needs.
Perfect. Yeah, there will be soon that functionality in whatever learning management system that you've been using.
That's right.
One. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. This is about the framework or the lesson plan framework that you all just shared. So Pramesh is asking whether, Ram Kumar Kalakheti is asking, does the same idea work when we are teaching language, maths, and science, or would it be different?
For me, I would say the lesson structure is the same, a beginning, middle, and end. For pretty much all lessons. Our webinar had a beginning, middle, and an end. The content is then different. So in a maths lesson, the introduction would also be an introduction to the concept that you're teaching. Then some input from the teacher and some practice by the students.
Yeah, I have been a math teacher also, and I would trust math teachers on knowing what works best for them. But there are lots of skills and ideas that you can transfer across the disciplines, and definitely the fundamentals are the same, particularly the online structure.
Particularly with a focus on a practice element for the students to be applying their knowledge for themselves.
Right. Yeah, having them do some daily activities that they would do with mathematics would be probably the most helpful. And using the principles of active learning theory like we did, having students be creative and do a lot of guesswork and engage them. I think some of those techniques are useful.
Okay. The next question comes from Pramesh. He says, what would you advise? Should I base my lesson on content or language, or should I take a blended approach?
Interesting question. Any thoughts, Dr. Uttam?
I would take a blended approach because it helps students. As much as you can blend as teacher, because put the student at center. You may be a mathematics teacher, but that doesn't preclude you from, telling your students the meaning of a word that they don't know. And that works across all the subjects. So for the holistic development of students, I would definitely be blending.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I think students' abilities to learn multiple things, some content and the language, makes it all so much more interesting.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Let's move to the next one. There's a lot of questions coming in. I don't know if we're going to have time for all of them. The next one comes from Elena. I think quite an interesting one, so I picked it up. How can we involve shy students who are not comfortable to turn on their video and audios and participate in an online lesson?
One thing I have found an advantage of online platform is that when it is computer mediated, they are more inclined to participate. If they are not speaking, you can ask them to write on the chat or text. And definitely because of the dominance of the teacher, which is a little further away. So I think that's helpful. Again, the teacher should be patient and call out the students if need be and wait for them to respond. For some students, it takes time. I think that works. That goes a long way. What do you think, Karen?
Yes, I agree. No, very, 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 very wise words. We've discovered that a lot of shyer students do feel more comfortable with the camera off, but we can still hear them. And so it's a process, starting off very slowly and gently. The same in a face-to-face class. How do we get our shy students to talk? We might ask them to write a sentence first, or just to give a thumbs up, thumbs down, or just to say a single word, maybe to their neighbor. So they could, in a breakout room, whisper something. Just on that point of breakout rooms, I don't know if any of you use them, but what we've noticed is that when the teacher visits with their video off and their sound off in a breakout room, it's much less intrusive for monitoring than in a face-to-face classroom. And so in some ways that enables the students to continue talking more with the teacher's presence. So I would say patience, like Dr. Otam says, and slowly, and lots of praise and encouragement.
Okay, thank you for that. Could you all please keep your microphones and videos off, please? We were behaving very well today, so I would like you all to continue the same way. The next question is about, I think, the dynamics of the learners that we have. Bimla asks, how can we address the slow learners when we teach our lessons online?
Give them plenty of time, because they don't have to finish everything synchronously. As Karen mentioned, there are asynchronous ways too. So if they have all the time at home, allow them to redo their assignments, allow them to make mistakes, and wait for them to catch up. And always be supportive, be there to support, because every student is unique and we have to respect that.
Yes, absolutely, that's right. And one of the advantages of online lessons is that we can send materials to students before the lesson and after the lesson.
Yep.
And even during the lesson. So if there's somebody who is struggling a little bit in the class, we can send them some extra information in the chat, or we can ask another student to explain, as we might do in a face-to-face class. We also might send some extra work or different work before and after the lesson. So in many ways, an online environment is quite supportive. Again, we were talking about the learner autonomy, and so students can sort of choose their own journey. So when we think in the face-to-face class, what is the maximum benefit of having people not face-to-face in an online class? So reading can be done at home in their own pace. They can look up words on their own. When we do that in a face-to-face class, it can be quite frustrating somewhere when a student finishes quickly and another one is like, oh, wait for me, wait for me. So if we're thinking, when we're planning our lessons, which parts of the lesson will be most beneficial to all students, and often that is the parts around vocabulary and pronunciation and speaking and listening. The other parts can be done asynchronously.
Okay, I think we have time for, I've picked down 3 questions. Okay, probably we'll have time only for those 3. The first one, a couple of them had asked this question, Keshav, Saurav, Praveen, Prakash, I think a couple of more if I've missed the names. It's about online bullying and cyberbullying. So it's very difficult for us as teachers to check online bullying. Could you give us some tips or shed some lights on how we can control that?
Yeah, I would take a stab. Ask students not to share personal information. I see that a lot, actually. Even adults, parents do that in my country, Nepal. That we share too much personal information, which just exposes our vulnerabilities. Have some policies around that, and also, as I would repeat that, because when students know that they're asked to do something that makes them uncomfortable, stop and consult your parents. And teachers, you can just share the instructions with the students and involve parents as much as possible, because you have no control over their home, and you may not even see whether they are also engaged in other activities with other multiple windows in their computer. And some school districts here have the software to alert the school, because I think that works particularly with the devices that the school districts give and install that kind of software. That kind of technology may not be available, but technology is not the solution. The solution is another eyes, the guardian, the company. Karen, what do you have to add?
No, that's true, and I think sort of what you're saying, Dr. Uttam, is it's a lot about learner training. So it's a lot about educating the students on their behavior on social media and to be reporting what's happening. So for me, this is a really amazing opportunity for a lot of our young people to learn how to use social media well and responsibly. It's something that I've noticed in the different countries I've worked in, that there hasn't been a lot of education around careful use of social media. So for example, if I'm putting a picture on social media, in my mind, I might be thinking, oh, I'm putting this picture for my parents, but actually on Facebook, there's maybe 100 or 200 or 300 people that might see it. So I need to think, who am I doing this? So it's 2 ways: learner training for responsible use of social media, and to tell the students and empower the students to be able to report and who they should go to when they see something, or if they are not feeling very comfortable with what's going on.
Okay. The next one is it's about inclusion, really. Deepak, and I think I missed the second name, but there was another related question to this. How can we use online classes for students with special needs like sight problems, physical disabilities, dyslexia?
There are policies on visibility. We have, I remember going through a quality matters training. There are standards for people who are colorblind. There are some colors that are visible to people who are colorblind also. I think that is a whole another level of sensitivity. I really appreciate this, being thoughtful about who could be colorblind, who could be of a different ability. I think that thought process makes you teachers the most amazing people in the world. So be thoughtful, ask that question, do some research, you will get the answers. And your school district may come up with policies on how to include. So it's your resourcefulness and sensitivity that matters a lot.
There's a lot of the online tools have accessibility features on them, either closed captions for people with sight difficulties. Obviously the audio needs to be very clear, and those who can't write so easily can use voice recordings, and those who can't hear so well can use the text and the chat. So like Dr. Uttam is saying, you know, think about all these different ways of accessibility. Just a point on board work, for example, is keeping it very simple. We can use colors, but not too much text boxes or borders, because screen readers sometimes find it difficult to read a lot of tables and borders.
Yeah, one thing I was asked to do is when I include a picture in the middle of a text, I also write the caption of the picture describing the person who cannot read the picture can read the caption and still get an idea of what is there.
Yeah.
So there are more nuances than that, I believe, and there are experts around this area, and this is a big area of research as well. But being thoughtful, I really appreciate the person who asked this question, and I want everybody, all of us, to be sensitive towards students with different abilities.
Yeah.
And if I may, I've put down a link on the chat box. There's a series of tips that we've developed. So one is on inclusion, maintaining inclusion in remote teaching context. So for everyone, I've put a link down there. You can access some important information there as well. Okay, I think this will be the last question for the session today. This is more about asynchronous learning. There were a couple of questions saying, how can we reach out to our learners who don't have internet connections? And I've picked out this one, which is very relevant. How can we execute remote learning using phones and SMS? Because Karen, you did mention it during the webinar as well. Maybe some tips to use that form of learning.
So this is an amazing opportunity. You know, I get very excited about things like this, that we have so many tools at our fingertips. So we can't reach everybody, and there are a lot of people who will be excluded, which is tragic. But there are also a lot of people who can be included if we're thinking in different ways. So sending text messages either to a parent to pass on to a student, and using WhatsApp groups or using SMS groups. Some countries have used radio and TV as well to deliver lessons through the collaboration between the radio channels, the government and teacher associations to be able to plan those materials connected to the course books. And I think the British Council has a number of tips on teaching with SMS and WhatsApp and radio and TV and YouTube as well.
Yep.
Anything to add, Dr. Uttam?
No, I just wanted to confirm, right? Inclusion of radio, television, and integration of phones.
Yeah.
Those are powerful. I think we can reach with those.
Because I think if we're thinking like, what do I have rather than what do I not have? Exactly. So if I'm going, oh, I don't have a smartphone, I can't do this. Oh, I don't have a laptop, I can't do this. But what do I have? I've got a phone. Maybe I've got a loud voice. Maybe I can use the postman or postwoman. Maybe I can leave a message on a window for somebody to see. So there's lots of things that we do have. And if we can sort of embrace the problem or the situation. Right,
yeah. Sending the materials via post and leveraging on that via video or local FM stations, I think, can accomplish a lot.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Right. Thank you so much. I think that brings us to the end. I've left a link to the guidance. I mean, we've created some remote teaching tips for our teachers. So I've left a link there where you can find a lot of information. Like Karen mentioned, there are a lot of tips there to use SMS, WhatsApp groups, radio, lots of tips where teachers can access. So I've put down the link there on the chat box. Thank you so much, Karen and Dr. Uttam. It's been a really wonderful session. I'm sure the participants have got a lot. Thank you everyone for joining in as well. We had over 100 participants in the webinar today. Really encouraging. Hope you'll have learned some really nice tips to take on and introduce it in your online lessons. So yeah, the links will come to you tomorrow. We will be sharing the links over the email tomorrow, and do watch the webinar again for links to the presentation as well. And thank you again to our lovely presenters.
Thank you
too. Thank you too.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Uttam sir.
Salute to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.